And so for the year 2021, because Oneness New Thought is a new institution and a new school of thought, a new interpretation and articulation of religious science, we're going to spend all this year talking about the core principles of Oneness New Thought. And the core principles of Oneness New Thought can be found on our Facebook page, and I'll put, or excuse me, on our webpage, and I'm going to put a link to that in our chat too. So bam, there's all your good stuff right there that we had for the last year. And then here is a link to our spiritual principles. Because if you want to know what it is that we believe, we want you to be able to access that and to do it in a way that doesn't mean telling you that you have to have some really deep, abstract, studious, scholastic, mental gymnastics to get the job done, or read some gigantic book. We feel that we can articulate our principles very directly. And so those 12 core principles are what we're going to be talking during the 12 months of the year this year. And that means that today is the very first service of 2021 and of our first core principle. And core principle number one really roots us in every aspect of our faith. And so let's take a look at our first core principle for the year. The first core principle of oneness is that God is all there is. Every aspect of creation is one thing. By whatever name we use to describe it, we accept that there is nothing else that exists. All thought is God thinking. All feeling is God feeling. All action is God acting. Everything that exists is an expression of God and is in and of itself God. And so, you know, I want to kind of address the very first elephant in the room. And that is this word God. Now, I know there's a lot of folks out there that when they hear that word, they shudder, right? A lot of folks who just the word God is just like a, right? That's okay. That's why there's nothing wrong with that if you have that reaction to that word. And I want you to know that in order to believe in or practice or pursue Oneness New Thought does not mandate that you use that word as the word that describes this infinite thing. Dr. Ernest Holmes originally called it the thing itself. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's cool. But there is something that's important to note about that, which is the entire faith really rests on our ability to use our mind to create the experiences, the responses that we have to the world around us. And so I want to explain why we use the word God and then get into what that's all about. So we use the term God because throughout human history, that's a word that has been used to describe omniscience, omnipotence. It has been the word that humanity culturally throughout many different cultures has used to describe their concept or idea of this grandest authority in the universe, this biggest thing that is part of the thing itself, this thing that they call God. And every person, when you ask them like what that word means to them, might give you a different response, even if they come out of the same faith, because that idea of our highest power, the highest divine order of all existence, is personal to every person who formulates an opinion about that idea, right? Because it's faith. We're placing faith in an idea rather than proving that this is definitively what it is. At least that's what we believe here in our faith. And so this idea of using the term God can become a spiritual practice in and of itself, and I'll tell you why. The only person who can define that word for us is ourselves. The only person who can truly identify within ourselves what it is that we think that highest power is ourselves. And it can be a very powerful process to go into our own mind and to revisit and review and reflect on why we have certain relationships with certain words. And boy, isn't it great? Wouldn't it be wonderful if someone could come up with a philosophy that would help us, that when we found ourselves stuck in a really bad definition of a word, that we could take another look at it and find within it something greater so that we could carry that forward with us. Where could we find a philosophy like that? Right? That's what we're all about. And so it makes sense for us as a new institution, as a new, very specific school of thought teaching religious science, that we articulate that we articulate this concept for ourselves of what is the thing itself and what is God. But also because when we want to have conversations with other folks, it's kind of important for us to have a shared language, don't you think? And so even though we have different definitions of what the term God represents for me and the way that it's been fashioned into Oneness New Thought, it has a very specific meaning, and yet simultaneously a very obscure and obtuse one. So let's talk about this idea that God is all there is. And I'm reminded by Jill Pekowski in the chat here, one of my favorite words to use to describe it is ineffable. And her husband would be very quick to remind all of us that that means that God cannot be effed. So it's ineffable, which is not what it means. But it means that it's so much more than what we could possibly describe. No matter how much time and energy we spend describing what we believe God to be, we will fail to fully articulate all of what God is. But one of the ways that really helped me connect to this when I was young, and I'm pretty nerdy, so I like to lean into a lot of my old nostalgic nerddom. And one of the things that helped me connect to this idea of God was Star Wars, right? Because as a young kid, I didn't have faith. And so I was looking for this idea that there was something bigger, something greater, something grander, but that something that was impersonal to us, something that didn't treat each of us differently, something that didn't think that it was picking and choosing who the good ones and the bad ones were, that we were the ones who were choosing how to engage it. And so when we talk about this idea that God is all there is, we're really talking about that ness, right? The topic on today's talk title was oneness, right? And what is that ness? What is that oneness that is in everything, as everything, through everything, for everything's highest good? And when I say like the oneness, I don't mean the one Nintendo Entertainment System to rule them all, okay? Right? I mean that essence, that thing that everything is made out of. If you could imagine it like a gigantic Lego set, if you built the world's largest Lego set, no matter how complex and how vast and how big or small or creative, no matter what you built, everything in that set would be made of Legos, right? But we take it one step further here by saying that not only are the Legos God, but the thing that put the Legos where they are is God. The thing that had a creative thought that was a Lego is God. The thing that decided to create different shapes and sizes and colors of Legos is God. And the thing that was creative enough to take all of that and create the magnificent landscape of that, you know, what would we call that? Like the Lego-dom is the one thing. And all of it is a part of that. And so this month, we're going to go through each Sunday and we're going to talk about some of the different lenses through which we can view God, because it is so vast. And one of the things that I personally, me and my ministry are really engaged in is this concept of diversity, inclusion, this concept of really taking advantage of the multiplicity of what God has created on earth. And it's interesting, you know, I've heard this several times in trainings and at seminars and in conversations, which is that we have this weird culture right now of diversity that thinks that diversity is a thing that we make. But in reality, diversity is a latently demonstrable truth. Think about it. Diversity isn't something that you make. Diversity just is. It just is. The number of kinds of trees, the number of kinds of grasses, the number of oceans, the number of stars, the number of hairs on some people's heads if they have hair, right? All of it. All of those different ways of expressing and being the divine come from and are themselves the one thing. And so what does that mean for us, though? Like, what does it mean for oneness? What does it mean to have that ness in everything, that divineness, that beautiful ability to have creativeness, to have inspirational and aspirationalness, something in everything that is just absolutely unfolding, evolving forward, always forward, always one direction, from thought and into creation. And when we think about God in this way, we have to really start retooling our own minds, right? Because if we believe that God is all there is, and we do, and we believe that everything and everyone is an expression of it, then when we think of God, we have to begin practicing what it means to look at everything as if that were the case. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I put on my glasses and I look back at 2020, it can be a little challenging to find the ness in some of that stuff. Anybody else? Maybe I'm the only one. You know, maybe in the chat you can out yourself as being one of those folks who looks back at certain times, certain experiences, and says, boy, I don't really want to have to tell myself that there's God in all of that. But what we know in this teaching is that if God is all there is, then there can be nothing beyond it. If it's all there is only one, and that one thing is God. But we also know that that one thing is so diverse. It expresses in so many beautiful, creative ways. And when we invite ourselves to begin to view the world through that lens of oneness, we begin to find ourselves rethinking a lot of stuff that we've already thought up. You know, our mind is this giant reservoir and recess full of all of our past thinking. Like anytime we've ever thought anything in our head, even if no one else could hear it, there it was in our mind. And it has an effect. It settles in. The sediment of those thoughts settles into the bed of our subconsciousness and becomes the way that we think about and we see the world. And so when we shift our idea of what God is into that idea that God is everything, and then we recognize the divine principles that make up that everythingness: peace, beauty, joy, truth, love, life, and light. When we think about the idea that everything has all of that in it all the time, we begin to think differently. Now, thinking differently is important. Thinking differently is like the root of the whole process. However, if new thoughts do not inspire new behavior, then we find ourselves on an intellectual journey and not a spiritual one. And so when we say God is all there is, we need to use our intellect in order to help us reflect upon it, envision what it would do in our lives if we tapped into it, meditate on how it can inform us on what we're doing right now, pray through it to empower its presence in our mind and in our experience. We need to embrace and grab onto it and hold on to it. And so it's good that we use our intellect as a tool to work with the divine. But remember, if God is all there is, then God is all intelligence. If God is all there is, then God is every reflection, every vision that has ever existed, has existed in the mind, in the heart, in the spirit, and the soul of that one divine universal presence that I choose to call God. And then I invite you to call whatever you want. But boy, if this idea, this feeling of like, oh yeah, it's everywhere, it's everything, it's all of that out there, but also it's all of this in here. It's all of this right in here. If we cultivate that feeling, we can take that feeling and apply it to this word of God, so that whenever we hear the word God, regardless of who's speaking it or what their intention about it might be, it can be a reminder for us to come back to this place where we see the wholeness, the perfectness, the diversity, and the brilliance of God. Then that becomes the new way that we experience that word. And that becomes the new lens through which we view people who use that word. Even if they use that word in ways to describe things that aren't what we believe, we have to be the ones who enact our mind and say, bruh, I'm not going to be bothered by this word or this other person's opinion of it. I'm going to recognize our oneness in the fact that we would even contemplate or consider these ideas as human beings, as living expressions of the divine. And so as we move through this week, especially, there's a lot of people out there doing the New Year's thing. Anybody doing the New Year's thing? If you're doing a New Year's thing, feel free to put that in the chat right now, and to know that our staff and our board and myself and the rest of our community will be praying and supporting you in that endeavor. So if you've got something that you have already committed yourself to, some people call it a New Year's resolution, other people, intention setting, whatever it is. If you got together and did a vision board for your year, whatever the heck you did, right? What I want to invite you to know is that if you share that with this community, we're committed to love and nurture and support that for you. To pray, to know that that will happen. Not to be the critic that will point out where it's not happening later, but the one that even later, if it is engaging with your inner critic, will remind you about your oneness and reaffirm your intention. So if you've got that, toss that in the chat and let us pray for you. Let us support you and nurture you in spiritual practice. And that's my challenge for this week. How can we, as a community, commit to each other that what we're going to do is not simply wrap our head around the intellectual ideas of this teaching, but that we're going to get in there and do our best to practice. And so I'm going to put a little link in the chat here, because there are 7 core spiritual practices that we commit to here in this teaching, Oneness New Thought. And it's high time that we start talking about them and using them and sharing them with each other. And one of the great ways that you could do that this week, if you really wanted to, do a specific spiritual practice where you don't have to do any thinking at all, you just got to show up and experience it, then Kimberly Akers did this magnificent reflection for this year. I put that link in the chat again, and that's a great way to be in spiritual practice. But here's what I'm going to encourage. As a spiritual leader, it's not enough for me to just say, oh, this is how it is. We have this God. It's all that there is. And so, awesome, great, go have a good life, right? It's my responsibility as a spiritual leader to say, and it's worth investing our time and energy in cultivating our relationship with it so that it can improve our lives in ways that we choose to improve our lives, or so that it can vastly expand. For some folks, faith is the thing that you pull out when times are dire, right? But regardless of whether you're wanting to transform or transcend something in your life, or if you're doing something amazing and you want to strap like an afterburner rocket to it and give it an extra boost, doesn't matter. And everything in between, spiritual practice is a style of living. It is a living lifestyle in which you place those spiritual practices at the forefront of your being. And so it would be crazy if I didn't come out here as a spiritual leader and at the very beginning of the year, look you dead in the eyes and say, I am ready for you to achieve whatever it is that you'd like to achieve in your spiritual journey, and to support you and to nurture you in doing that. And to hold all of us accountable to doing that work, not with punishment, but with inspiration and with vision. And so, how might your life change in the span of a week if you were to commit to a spiritual practice every single day? If you already do that, what would happen if you added a little something to it that was new? If you've never done that, what would happen if you just picked it up and played with it and stuck with it long enough to see if you could get it to have an effect in your life? And so if you're unclear about the way that we pray in this teaching, that's okay, because I'm going to drop another link here in the chat where you can go and learn all about the way that we pray. It's called affirmative prayer. And if you've been part of our services before, you've heard us say, please join me in this affirmative prayer. And if not, you'll be hearing it for the first time today. But what I want you to know is that there's no wrong way to do it. There's only the practice of it to become in greater relationship to it. And why do we want to have a greater relationship with our affirmative prayer? Why do we want to have a greater relationship with our spiritual practices? Because that is how we cultivate our relationship to the only thing that there is, the divine, God, Spirit. And I don't know about you guys, but I've never had a relationship that didn't involve me having to put some work into it. That's friendships, that's family relationships, that's spiritual community relationships, that's romantic partnerships, that's every kind of way that I am in relation with other human beings. And so we can embrace the idea that our relationship to the divine is universal. If it's all that there is, it's all that we are. And next month, we'll be talking about that a lot. However, just because we have a relationship in our life doesn't mean we're getting all the goodness out of it that we could be getting out of it, right? And sometimes that means being the one who picks up the phone, being the one who reaches out, being the one who engages, being the one who says, boy, I'd really like to have more conversation. I'd really like to have more support. I'd really like to have more nurturement, more affirmation in my life. And then what good would it do for us to sit around and just pine for that? Spiritual living is about reaching out and seeking that, engaging that, embracing that. And if you're looking for a community of people to do that with, you have found it. You have found it. If you are enjoying these conversations that we have on Sundays and the services and the content that we share and all of the different videos that we're making and prayers that we're speaking, if you love all of that, I want to invite you to step into it this year and to be a part of it and engage in it and practice it for yourself, and also reach out to others and seek and find ways to practice it with one another. Because what good is spiritual community if it's just something to inform your intellect and then send you back out into the world to try and fumble around with it on your own? No, spiritual community is about us figuring that out together. And what we know is that God, as being the only thing that there is, infinite goodness, infinite potential, infinite opportunity, then we have to seize all of that potential, all of that good. And what better way to do it than with other people? Right? Like, if we're going to cultivate our faith in the one thing that is the divine, we need to start cultivating faith in each other as human beings. We need to believe that there is a goodness in us that is so complete and so whole that it has drawn us together. And that by talking about our faith and sharing our faith with others, we don't have to be out in the world proselytizing anyone else or telling them how to do it or defending the way that we're doing it. What we're doing is we're unlocking our ability for people to know us more deeply. When we embrace and engage a spiritual teaching like Oneness New Thought, we are sharing a large perspective about who and what we are with the world. And we're inviting the world, we're welcoming the world and our spiritual community to hold us accountable to those ideas. And sometimes that can be challenging. Sometimes that can be a pain in the backside. And yet, in the awareness of our spiritual kinship, that is the value that we add to each other's lives. It's the value we draw from our relationships to each other. And it's the opportunity that we have to develop a deeper and more powerful relationship with God, a conscious one. It's already so. The question is, are we pursuing, investing in, and developing and absolutely working on that relationship to our divinity every single day? And so we have each other. We have each other to do that with. And so my challenge for you this week is to be in spiritual practice of some form or fashion every single day. And if you're someone who already does that, awesome. I'm going to challenge you to mix it up a bit, to try some new stuff, to do something a little, I don't know, fresh, right? Because now's the time. If ever in the lives of those who are on this earth right now, there has been a time, now is the time. Now is the time to pick up our spiritual practices. Now is the time to recognize the divinity of all things. Now is the time to realize that if our faith tells us that God is all that there is, that it's our responsibility to begin moving through and living in the world as if that were already so, because it is. And so this week, I challenge you not only to do that, but to consider being with each other, reaching out to one another. Even if that means coming to this video, looking through the chat, finding people that you don't know, and sending them an instant message or a direct message or a Facebook message, whatever the heck you want to call it, reaching out and saying, hey, I saw you there in service. And I just wanted to reach out and say hi and see what you're about and just let you know that I'm doing my spiritual practices this week and I'm supporting you in doing yours. Those little acts are not little. That's community. That's community. And so I invite all of us into a deeper sense of our awareness that God is all there is this week by nurturing the oneness that all of us share, by being together with one another in prayer and spiritual practice, and by really making a conscious decision to invest in our relationship to the entire universe. And so, what better place to start than right now? So I invite you to please join me in this affirmative prayer. Because what I know is that God is all there is. One love, one life, one light, one divinity, one spirit, one soul, one creative idea, one creative action, and one creation. All of it, everything, every drop of it, no matter how diverse it is and all the multiplicity that exists within it, all of it is the thing itself. It is one thing, and that one thing is good. It is God. It is divine. It is powerful. It is virtuous as peace and beauty and joy and truth and love and life and light. And so I know that that moves through me, in me, as me, and for my highest good right now, but not because I'm on a selfish endeavor to make my life some perfect thing that I imagine it to be, but to be a part of the expression of a community of folks on this planet that recognize that in each other, recognize that in the world, recognize that in our environment, recognize that everywhere we look. And wherever there is an opportunity to bring an even greater awareness of that divinity into play, I know that we are bringing it into play now in our lives, in our relationships, in our workplaces, in our social circles. Every single place we live and breathe and move is a center of oneness. And so when we claim that, we can feel it, an empowerment, a sense of confidence that lets us know that we don't have to have all the answers. We simply move into the activity of practicing what it means to live spiritually in this way. And in so doing, we call on that divine presence, knowing that it does arrive and show up from within us and all around us to serve ourselves and others and our communities in ways that only love can do. And so with that knowing in mind, we give thanks. We accept that all this is true. It's all real. And so in its realness, we embrace and accept its rawness, knowing that even though some of this stuff is really raw and just out there kind of doing its thing, it is all in the mind of God, absolutely unfolding in divinity and goodness, and the blessings that it affords us and the other people in our lives and the world around us is absolutely unstoppable. It is a force that cannot be dismissed. It cannot be effed, no matter how ineffable it is. So I give thanks for all those blessings, knowing that they're already here, without them even showing up in my life yet. I'm grateful for those things, for what acknowledging and accepting this truth and living this way brings to my life. I'm grateful for all of it. And in that sense of gratitude, I surrender the need to make it all happen myself and force everything into the right spots by knowing that that divine thing all around me is not hearing this prayer. It is this prayer. It is not listening to this prayer. It is speaking this prayer. And in so doing, in all of its brilliance and wisdom and intelligence, it is creating the highest possible outcome for me and everyone in my presence always. That is what I surrender to now. And as I surrender it to that, I know that it has already received it, said yes to it, and affirmed it, because it is all that there is. And it is good. And so I know it is done right here and right now. And so it is. Amen.